And he says to me the next slide, it just sent chills down my spine. He says, I made them bleed. They're not going to be ready for adulthood, but they're going to be on their way to it. The question becomes then, what do you do to get them there? What do you do to set them on the right path? So again, I fall back to basics. I look at the strength of body, strength of mind, strength of spirit. And how do we develop those things? All three of those things. And again, parents oftentimes make a mistake here. If you look at professional athletes, the bankruptcy rate among professional athletes is outrageous. And why? It's because they brought to the table this amazing athletic skill and ability, and they've ignored the strength of mind and the strength of spirit. And because of that, they're not a balanced adult. It leads them to bad places. So we're never going to be perfectly balanced mind, body, and spirit, but we should always, as parents, we should be driving our kids to be as balanced as possible. And I use a example there of a professional athlete, but I could go the other direction. The classic tiger mom who's obsessed with grades, and it's nothing about their emotional. It's nothing about their physical. It becomes all intellectual as the only indicator of real success. And as we all know, in the long run, that doesn't create the healthiest adults. It just doesn't. So we have to look at those three strengths and how to grow them. So I looked at all of these different characteristics we want to develop in our kids. And I came up with independence, confidence, and good decision-making as kind of the pinnacle. Because under each one of those, you've got to develop in your kids all kinds of characteristics to get there. Take good decision-making. You've got to teach your kids problem solving. You've got to teach them critical thinking skills. You're not going to be making a lot of good decisions if you don't have good problem solving, critical thinking skills. Now, here's something people forget, I think, and that's honesty. Honesty about yourself, honesty about others, a situation.
Being problem solving skills in my three boys. Using the Bob Donna method of child rearing, which is figure it out, right? I told the story another podcast. Last week, I had a big problem. My son couldn't open the gate, and I was in a rush, and I had to sit in the car for 15 minutes while he figured out how to open the gate. And so how do you develop that problem solving, or what kind of situations did you have raising your son that allowed you to kind of develop that in him?
I believe in a concept called pushing them at the boundaries of their abilities. Everyone has different boundaries, but it's at those boundaries that you grow. So you have to start out simple and get more and more complex. But let me throw this out, which is, I think, a great way to explain it, which is how do you build a muscle? And when you look at the biology of it, the science of it, you have to get micro tears in your muscle. You have to damage your muscle to actually grow it. What I would refer to as developmental damage. Parents are afraid to damage their kids in any way. But if you want to grow a muscle, you've got to damage it slightly, and you've got to give it help, food and rest, and it will repair itself, and it will repair itself to be stronger. And parents get too afraid of damaging their kids. And when I talk about that, I use muscle as an example, but it's the same with intellectual. It's the same with emotional. Starting young. Something you said in a previous video I watched of yours, you talked about kids from 0 to 6. They're kind of all the same. Now, I hope I can change your mind on that. I believe that we start developing our kids in the very first year of their life. And just like you said with the gate, we start in very simple ways and we build it. So for example, a baby, I fed my son anything and everything. Now here's something a little crazy, but I think it'll make sense to you. I'd feed him things that tasted nasty. I wanted him to experience not just good. Now I knew it was going to come out, and that's fine, but I wanted him, standpoint, to get the full range of whatever I could. So letting him smell things like vinegar or rotten milk, as well as wonderful things like flowers, herbs, and spices. So I think what we forget often as parents, especially when they're younger, is we've got to lay out the full gambit of whatever that experience you're trying to expose them to, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And too often we leave the bad and the ugly off the table.
And so what I really meant by kids up until 6 are all the same, the kids themselves are not the same, but they haven't had social parameters placed on them. They're not in society yet. So you take a 5-year-old that's going to kindergarten, now he's in society. Now you have societal stuff that can really affect that kid, right? I 100% agree with you that raising kids early on is just as important. I know for me, we have the house mantra, be a leader, be a superstar, be a zwig. The other house mantra is, where are you going to college? Harvard, Yale, Stanford, West Point. That came from my dad asking me every day, how are you going to pay for college? Every day my dad asked me, how are you going to pay for college? How are you going to pay for college? So my point is, kind of around that 0 to 6 range, kids don't have a lot of outside influence on what they should be doing and what's normal, right? So for me, my boys have grown up, I would say, abnormal. We do stuff that normal families don't do. I also understand that I don't give any advice on a process that I don't fully understand or I haven't been through. So you don't hear me giving a lot of parenting advice. I know my kids can talk to people. My kids will introduce themselves. They will talk to you. They will do a good job socially. I know that, okay? But I'm not going to talk to you about, how do I make a kid get into to the Naval Academy if I don't know how to put a kid in the Naval Academy? Now, that's a different story, right? Because I've mentored so many kids from 7th grade on. I know how that works. But the one thing I don't know is, in my own house, as a parent, how do I influence my kids? Because I have my kid's 13. So I'm not going to talk about the finished product ever. You know, I got a lot of people that want me to talk about parenting and success and all this other stuff. And I said, listen, when my kids get to 25 and I can judge how I did as a parent, then I may be willing to start saying, hey, this is what I did. This is how it worked. This is why I did it. I'm also trying to counteract being raised by a hellion in my house. And my kids already understand that I'm different.
See, what you're doing, I think, is great, because what you're really saying is, I challenge my kids in lots of different ways and see how they respond to that. That's life. Those are the challenges. So challenging them in many different ways is very important. You know, again, I talked about that boundaries of your abilities. That's where real growth occurs. It's where we actually expand our world. I'll tell you a quick story. My son got into trail running pretty young. Actually, we went up to the North Georgia mountains. We were with two of his buddies and their fathers, and we did some hiking. They wanted to fish. I don't want to fish. I'm not really a fisherman, but I knew that there was based on the trailhead, it said there's a waterfall 1.5 miles down the trail. And these guys wanted to fish for 30 minutes or so. So I looked at my son. I said, hey, we're going to have to jog down there. You want to go? Let's go check out. Well, he just takes off. He's running. We're jumping over logs and rocks. We round a bend. There's a waterfall. We take off our shoes. We swim. We run back. You know, it was a blast. I was just shocked. This little kid, I think he was maybe 6 or 7. Now, the sad thing about it is, we get back, neither of his buddies, they didn't catch any fish. My son's all excited, telling a story about how he went to the waterfall. These kids want to go now. And they're like, no, now it's time to go. So it was fun. Now, that was his beginning trail run. So we got into some trail running series. I think he's around 9 years old. I said, you want to try a 15K. 15K, how long is that? 9.3 miles. So he goes and runs this race. He's out there for about an hour and 25 minutes as a 9-year-old. He finishes the 15K. He gets done. He looks at me. He says, man, that was tough. I'm tired. Now, the way I've always done things with him, my next 2 words are important words I felt as an adult. I always say to him, what's next? And he looked at me, and I could see it in his face. You could see him thinking, I wonder how far I could run. And that feeling right there is what we have to inspire in our kids, whether it's physical, intellectual, or emotional. Why do people use drugs? Any kind of drug. And it's the euphoria of that feeling they get, and they want to repeat that over and over. Unfortunately, it's destructive to them. But what if you could, that euphoria, teach your kids to get that feeling from all kinds of things in their life? It's just as addictive, but it's a healthy addiction, because I did this. Wow, that's awesome. I want to try the next thing.
And I very important point right here, because I'm battling this in my house right now. Electronics give the kid the exact same endorphin dump as if they're doing drugs. And that's why there's a huge correlation between screen time and drug addiction later in life, right? So I think you absolutely are hitting it on the head when you say, I need to give them another vehicle for them to experience that dump of adrenaline and euphoria of the success of doing something and completing it.
Right. And it's obviously a challenge, and you want to challenge them in different ways. Like, for example, we're guys. We generally think in terms of the physical. We bring up the intellectual. Sometimes we know grades are important. We tend to ignore the emotional. But one of the things I always do with my son is I try to get him to try something new every year outside of his comfort zone, like theater. I think every kid should be in the school play, middle school or high school, at least once. Memorizing lines. I don't care how small your role is. Memorizing lines, get in front of an audience, being part of that group. It's a really cool experience. Will it go great? Who knows? You will never know if you don't try it. But there's all kinds of things like that. I don't care if it's cooking. My kid loves chocolate chip cookies. Well, you know what? You're going to make the chocolate chip cookies with me next time. This morning, I saw your son making his own. He was making something. He was cooking.
Yeah, he's cooking pancakes for the whole family.
Yeah, that's exactly. So you enjoy pancakes? Well, maybe you should learn to cook pancakes.
Yep.
And there's another thing. Every kid, male or female, should know how to cook a few basic meals before they get out of high school. Absolutely. If your kids, as a parent, if you haven't taught your kids and cooking is not pouring a bowl of cereal. We're talking about cooking.
I just had a kid last year graduate from the United States Naval Academy, go to flight school, and was broke. And so I've had him for a long time. I had him freshman year in Naval Academy, and I'm like, trying to go through the checklist. Okay, what's wrong? Why are you broke? Where's your money going? What'd you buy for a car? Okay, what's the rent? Like, it doesn't add up. Like, you should have $2,000 extra every month. Send me your credit card statements. I open the credit card statements, Paul. I kid you not. 3 to 4 meals a day, Panera Bread, Chick-fil-A, Outback Steakhouse. I did the math. He was spending $2,000 a month on food. So I called him up and said, hey, but why are you eating out every day? I don't know how to cook, Jim. You don't know how to cook. You don't know how to make pancakes. No. You know how to do toast. No. I never cooked once in my life. I said, that's fine. I said, you're not allowed to eat out anymore, starting right now. So you better get on YouTube. I suggest you learn how to make pasta. Pretty much just boil some noodles, put some ragu on it, figure out what sauce you like, and then you need to figure out how to make pancakes and eggs. And I said, you Google it. I'm not even going to tell you. A month later, sent me his credit card statements, no food on it. So what do you eat? He said, Jake, I'm eating a lot of pancakes and I said, okay, you got YouTube. Let's figure out. So it's interesting that you say something as simple as just cooking your own meals. Cause I can remember being a 4-year-old in my house. My mom he's had one of those little electric stoves with 2 burners on it. It was like a play stove kit. And I would make 1 egg at a time at 4 with my little pan. And I would eat, my grandma said I would eat either 6 eggs. And if I went for 7, I would eat 12. But the fact that we're raising a generation right now that doesn't know how to cook, doesn't know how to solve problems, isn't good in social environments, like you and I are pretty much on the same page. If you get a kid to be able to solve problems, be social, you're going to beat 99% of the kids out there that are growing up right now because they can't do those 2 things.
Yeah, and what I think's been forgotten over time, parents are looking, just like sometimes your girlfriend is looking for this grand gesture for you when you want to propose to her. Grand gestures don't come around all that often. You really learn from the little things, and whether that's doing laundry, whether that's cleaning a toilet bowl or just basic things. There's always things that parents can do. Highly recommend everybody do. Now, you've got Waffle Houses here in Texas. I like to use a restaurant that's got an open kitchen and where you have to go up and pay. So I look at a meal out, especially when my son was much younger. It's a complete education. First off, he's going to order for himself. If he doesn't order for himself, and this happened once, I ordered for him. Now, I didn't say what I was ordering. I held the menu up and I pointed at it. The food that was put in front of him, he wasn't going to eat. He went hungry. That's fine. I boxed it up and we took it home. But after that, he ordered for himself. Look at just like you do with your kids.
That's an important point. You let him fail, okay? You set him up for failure. I set my kids up for failure all the time.
All the time.
And I tried, my wife, I try to help her out because sometimes she gets a little bit like this, I said, no, like I want them to fail as much as they can, right? I have one kid that I have to be careful because he doesn't deal with failure very well. Like it runs him off the tracks. But to your point, it's interesting because I'll hand them the credit card, right? Like we're not paying, I don't have no cash anymore. That's one big difference, but they have money and they want something, they got to pay in cash. And that's how I was raised in a Jewish household with a Jewish grandmother. I had an allowance every week. And so it's interesting because they have a lot of money and they want something. And you'll see my youngest son will not, we were playing poker. We gamble. Okay. He won't gamble because he doesn't want to lose the money, even though it's chips and there's no real money. And so when he has to buy something, he's like, go get the money. And he'll go get the money and then he'll come back and he'll be like, I don't want it anymore. So to your point, like everything is a learning experience, preparing them to be a young adult.
Yeah, anything can when you take a step back and look at it. Yeah, I've set my son up for failure. And here's what's so important about that you creating the failure. You could do it in a controlled environment, in a safe environment, where afterwards you can talk about what happened and why it happened. So all of our kids are going to fail at things when they're off and living their own lives, but consciously and purposefully setting them up for failure through their childhood years is just a great way to learn lessons.
Okay. So Paul, I just remembered I have some questions. Okay. How do you feel about spanking?
So I'll relate it to myself. I was an out of control child to a certain degree. Did I deserve spankings at times? Yes. And I got them. What you really have to do as a parent is find the most effective form of punishment. And you may default, some dads especially may default to necessarily the case. Child, so you've got to find out. Some kids, for a mom to go up and shed a tear and say, you've really disappointed me, that is some seriously effective punishment for many kids. Other kids, it's going to be different. Now, here's something I've done. Discipline is huge. Discipline is, you brought up discipline in a child, and that's what we're talking about here versus creating discipline in a child for themselves. But here's a discipline technique I use with my son who's young. I never had many problems with. When we would go someplace, let's say the zoo, I would tell him, these are the rules. Got 2 chances to screw up. And then, so one time we go to the zoo, he runs ahead of me to the admissions. I say, Joseph, you're aside. You just messed up on us. We go in. He sees the tigers off the bat or something. We're in there for a couple minutes. He runs off. I walk over to him. I don't know what he was. He's probably three or four. And I said, we're done. We got to go home. He's like, we just got here. I'm like, no, we're going home. You got your 2. You did it. You're done. So the minute he did the 3rd one, we were done. Super effective, because what you're doing is you're laying a very clear structure that I don't care how young they are, they'll understand it. Now, it's a lousy thing to do, pulling your kid out of a birthday party, because now every place you are, there's different behaviors that are acceptable. So you always have to look at the different places you're at. But pulling your kid out of a birthday party because he pushed somebody or did something and he got his 3rd time, it's very upsetting to everybody, but it is extremely effective discipline. Once you apply something like that consistently, your kids will stay in line. They will.
Paul, let me ask you this question. How do you evaluate as a parent the job you're doing? My kids, I was a terrorist at school. Okay, I was a terrorist. My kids' feedback from school is phenomenal. And that's kind of the barometer I've been using, right? Like, okay, now I also understand that they're dealing with other kids and all the other things. What do you do to kind of assess how you're doing as a parent?
I 100% agree with you. It's always someone else. See, in the long run, mom and dad don't matter. We're not going to give them their successes in life. They have to go out and they have to earn them in life. They have to prove to other people that they have value. So my son was difficult with me in many ways, especially in high school, like get 15, 16, 17. So I did exactly like you're suggesting. I looked at what other people, when some other parent came up with me and said, hey, your son was over with my son and they did this thing and boy, was he polite, or he cleaned up after himself. So that's exactly the way I did it, because if I judged my son by the way he behaved with me at times, then I would have been a complete failure as a parent. But by looking at the way they behave when they're out in the world on their own, that's the successes we're looking for. So you're right. Spot on. I agree with you.
Okay. No, I'm asking, you got your kids getting ready to graduate from college and I got a dang 8th grader. So it's interesting because, I tell everybody, like, you're only a parent once. And, my dad used to say to me a lot, I have a 13-year-old sister. She's 13 years older than me. And he was like, I'm raising you differently than I raised her. I'm allowing you to do stuff that I wouldn't allow her to do. And I'm not allowing you to do stuff that I allowed her to do. He said, I'm raising you differently. He would tell me that all the time. He said, I'm raising you differently. He's like, and it was interesting because I didn't understand until I became a parent, like you were saying, that I have 3 different kids and 3 different personalities. I have one kid that when he was 6, if you spanked him, he would laugh at you and tell you it didn't hurt. And so then you spank him harder and he would just laugh. And I was the same way, right? I just tell you, you can't hurt me. I don't care how hard you hit me. You're not going to hurt me. So I also got a father mentor early on, and I had some of those. He didn't never hit his kids, right? And so I also have a kid that, if you spank him, he's going to understand. Right. But we haven't had a spanking. I got a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 13-year-old, 14-year-old. We haven't had a spanking in the house for probably 6 years. Right. Like the little dude, you can't spank at all. You just can't. Right. Like all you got to do is, like you said, hey, I'm disappointed in you. And that's it. He's crashed.
Yeah. And that parenting. So, and the influence we have as parenting, because you talked about how do you parent each one, and they're each unique. You have to recognize that you apply the same standard and you're going to fail with at least 2 of the 3 and maybe all of them. But back to parental influence and how we treat them. It's one of the reasons why I believe you start parenting so young, because when you're dealing with a 2, a 3, or 4-year-old, a parent is godlike. Like they say it, and the child they have to do it. And if you use that power for good, with great power comes great responsibility, Spider-Man reference. If you use that power, you can establish the foundation in so many of these things when you have the most influence. And that's why, as young as they are, to lay down some rules for discipline. Like I said, if you are consistent, and consistency is key, and mom and dad have to agree, but you don't give them any gaps. You don't give them holes or ways to get out of things, or, I'm going to get you when you get home and then it's all over. If you're consistent, but that influence is so amazing when they're young that you can really lay down so many of the attributes, the foundation for those attributes that you want to develop in them later on. Here's one thing I find in a lot of parents. They talk about winning and they talk about success. But again, that is so unique. When my son, his first year in college, he went to Virginia Tech. And I think I mentioned earlier, I always try to get him to do something new every year. Try a new activity that could become a hobby or something you do throughout your life. So he's in his spring semester at Virginia Tech, and looking at the map of the town, and I realized there's a boxing gym down the road. So I call him. I said, listen, I'm going to get you a spring semester membership to this boxing gym. Will you go? And of course, they're inexpensive because they get so many college students. It ends up being awesome. He jogs up 2.5 miles to the gym. He does a boxing training, does a workout, and jogs back. He did it 3 or 4 days a week. He loved it. So I introduced him to something new. I helped encourage him. He's the one who did it, but I opened the door for him, and that was great. Now jump forward a year. A year later, he's in his spring semester, his first year at the Air Force Academy, and they're having their boxing tournament, squad against squad. I don't know if he gets volunteer. Does the military have a term for when they volunteer versus
voluntold?
Voluntold. There, I knew there was one.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if he was voluntold or if he volunteered, but he's boxing. He calls me up. He says, yeah, I got about tomorrow. This guy's been boxing for years. He's on the boxing team. I tell him, listen, go in there, do your best. He calls me the next day and I could hear it in his voice. I'm like, you do all right? He's like, well, I lost. But he said, I went into it and I didn't want him to I didn't want to get knocked out. I wanted to last every round with him and I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to show him that I wasn't just a pushover. And he says to me the next line, it just sent chills down my spine. He says, I made him bleed.